"Uncle, please, you are hurting me." Ugomma, who was a child, cried as her sister's husband continued abusing her. Life was a living hell for Ugomma. All this started when her mother died. She was 7 when she lost her mother. Ugomma was born into a family of 13. When her mother died, they had to split to different relations. Ugomma was the second to last born of the family. Some of her siblings had to go and live with their cousins, others went to stay with their auntie. Ugomma went to stay with her elder sister, who lives in a different state. When she went to her elder sister's house, everything was going well with her. Her elder sister's husband was not around when Ugomma came, he went on a business trip. But Ugomma's story changed when her elder sister's husband returned from his business trip. His name was Mr. Bernard. When Mr. Bernard came back home, everything changed for Ugomma. She started seeing hell. 3 days after Mr. Bernard arrived, something happened. Ugomma was outside playing around the house when her elder sister came to her and said, "Make sure you look after all those things I keep outside, and also don't forget to eat your food when you are hungry." Mrs. Felicia instructed and left for the market. Immediately when Ugomma's elder sister left for the market, Ugomma heard her name from inside the house. It looked like her sister's husband was calling her. So she quickly ran inside to meet him. "What are you doing outside?" Mr. Bernard asked. "Nothing," Ugomma answered in fear. Although Ugomma was only 7 years old, any little thing could scare her. Mr. Bernard drew her closer to himself and dipped his hands into her clothes. Ugomma was only a child, she never understood what her uncle was doing to her, she just stood in silence. She started feeling some pain around her while her uncle kept abusing her. Her uncle continued taking advantage of her till he got the satisfaction he was looking for. Ugomma didn't feel much pain that day, because Mr. Bernard didn't touch her deeply. But Ugomma knew in her mind that what her uncle was doing to her was not a good thing. Her uncle dressed her up and warned her never to tell anybody. Ugomma was afraid of her uncle, so she promised not to tell anybody about it. Even sometimes, she would try talking to her older sister, but she ignored her. That was how Ugomma's life changed for the worse. She kept growing up in pain. Mr. Bernard still didn't feel satisfied because his wife is always around the house. So he wasn't able to have sleep with Ugomma the way he wanted. Sometimes he would send his wife to different meetings just to make sure he slept with Ugomma. He opened a shop for his wife, so she will be staying at the shop at all times. He did this so that he would have enough time to spend with Ugomma. Her uncle further went to start sleeping with her. He sleeps with Ugomma every day. From 7 years old, she became 9 years old, and then she continued to face her uncle, who always abuses her. Older sister is not around. When Ugomma was 12 years old, her uncle started sleeping with her directly. Mr. Bernard was never bothered by how the poor girl felt, but he was only concerned about his satisfaction. Ugomma never told her elder sister about what her husband was doing to her. She was afraid of what her uncle might do to her. Then, finally, Ugomma got pregnant at the age of 14. When she realized she was pregnant, she cried bitterly. Her whole life was beginning to threaten her. What happens when her auntie finds out that her junior sister is pregnant? Well, days came to pass, and Ugomma's elder sister finally found out that Ugomma was pregnant. When her elder sister knew about this, she beat the hell out of Ugomma, including Mr. Bernard. While Ugomma's sister was beating, Mr. Bernard was making some signs for Ugomma that she should never open her mouth to say he was responsible. If she ever tells anyone that he is responsible for the pregnancy, her name is sorry. Ugomma was afraid of Mr. Bernard. She didn't tell her auntie that it was her husband who got her pregnant. Mrs. Felicia suggested that Ugomma be returned to the village. But her husband never agreed with that. He suggested that Ugomma should take a DNC. After so much argument. So they finally agreed on that decision, and they took Ugomma for a DNC. It was such a painful experience for Ugomma that she cried her eyes out. After the DNC has been done. 2 days after the DNC was done, Mr. Bernard started sleeping Ugomma again. He sleeps with her all the time, like before. This time around, after sleeping with her, he would force her to take some drugs, some kind of tiny drug to take to prevent Ugomma from getting pregnant. These drugs were not friendly at all. After taking these drugs, Ugomma always felt unconscious, like she was not herself anymore. This drug kept on disturbing her. Sometimes she would be feeling very weak and sick. Then Mr. Bernard came up with a plan. He took Ugomma to the hospital. They inserted something into Ugomma's body, something she never knew about. Due to that thing that was inserted into her body, Ugomma started seeing her periods like 4 times in a month. That's strange. Ugomma's auntie was complaining about this. How can someone be seeing her period like 4 times in a month? Her elder sister became worried. Then she took Ugomma back to the hospital, and they removed the thing that was inserted into her body. After all this, Ugomma got infected with some kinds of infections, not sexually transmitted infections, but due to what was inserted into her body. They quickly treated the infection without wasting time. After some days, Mr. Bernard started sleeping with Ugomma again, and then Ugomma got pregnant the second time. He secretly took Ugomma for a DNC, which was so painful. After some time, Ugomma got pregnant for the 3rd time. Ugomma's life was just miserable. Her whole life was under Mr. Bernard's control. She doesn't even have time for herself. She was always abused by her uncle. To cut the whole thing short, Ugomma got pregnant like 7 times. Ugomma was 19 years old when she got pregnant for the 7th time. That was when her auntie finally found out again. Her auntie took her to the hospital for DNC again. Then she asked Ugomma who was responsible for the pregnancy. Although Mr. Bernard said Ugomma should never mention his name to anyone, she didn't know when it came out of her mouth. Immediately, she said it was Mr. Bernard, her husband. Ugomma thought her auntie would be shocked or surprised, but she was not. She only asked if Ugomma was telling the truth, and then she said Ugomma couldn't keep a child for now. Her elder sister told her that she still needed to get rid of this pregnancy because she was too young to keep a child. We have to remove this one. After this pregnancy, you may now start having your own kids, Mrs. Felicia said. That was all Mrs. Felicia could say. She wasn't even bothered about the fact that it was her husband who got her sister pregnant. Ugomma felt very bad. It looks like the whole world has failed her. How can she tell her elder sister that her husband was the one who got her pregnant and her elder sister wasn't even bothered? That was when she knew that her situation was getting worse. Everyone had failed her. Ugomma thought her problem would be solved after she told her auntie, but it continued to get worse. There was no place for her to run. Life was just upside down for her. She couldn't even keep friends. She had no boyfriend to help her. Because whenever her uncle sees her with any guys, her uncle will beat the hell out of her. So she couldn't keep friends at all. As time kept going, Ugomma began to wonder if her auntie was even aware of what her husband had been doing to her, because she wasn't bothered when Ugomma told her about it. A lot of thinking came through Ugomma's mind. That's not all. Ugomma's elder sister has about 4 kids. Ugomma will cook for the family, clean the house, and take her auntie's kid to school before she goes to her own school. In fact, there was a serious scarcity of water at the place where they stayed. Ugomma had to walk a very long distance just to get water to do the housework. Life wasn't an easy one for Ugomma. She was passing through a lot of pain. Sometimes when Ugomma's elder brother comes to visit her, Ugomma would also try talking to her brother about this issue, but he never gave her his listening. Ugomma was always getting sad and skinny due to her problems. Sometimes, when her siblings come to visit her, they would be asking her why she is not getting fat but skinny. As in, She is living with a rich family, so why is she getting skinny? Upon all the whole food you are eating, you are still skinny, her siblings would say. But eating food without a rest of mind is a waste of time. It wasn't about the food. Mentally, Ugomma was dying in pain. There was no one to help her. Different thoughts started coming to her mind, and finally she decided to run. Ugomma ran back to her father because her father was still alive. When she got to her father, he was surprised to see Ugomma. Ugomma tried to explain everything to her father, but he would not listen, although she didn't go straight to her point. Her father told Ugomma that she must go back to stay with her auntie. Ugomma stayed with her father for like 1 week. During her time staying with her dad, she decided to go visit another of her elder sisters who also lives in that state. When she got to her elder sister's house, she told her elder sister about everything that Mrs. Felicia's husband had been doing to her. But her elder sister never believed. She told Ugomma to shut up. Ugomma, you are lying. That is how you go about spoiling your uncle's name. Ungrateful child, Ugomma's sister said. After sleeping around with different men, you are now saying it's your uncle, who had been sleeping with you, her sister replied. So after that day, Ugomma was taken back to her elder sister's house. And this time around, it got worse for Ugomma. The suffering continued. I can't really tell you everything that happened, but as time kept going, Ugomma grew into an adult. Ugomma received a lot of threats from her uncle and his family. She passed through a lot of pain for like 7 years. In fact, she was already getting used to all the maltreatment she was receiving. But one day she found this guy who loved her. His name was Prince. The guy was from a wealthy family, and he also loves Ugomma so much. They set a date for when he would come and visit Ugomma at her house. On that day, that was the first day he was coming to see Ugomma's family. Mr. Bernard was not in support of the relationship. In fact, he warned Prince never to come near his house or Ugomma ever again. So due to this, Ugomma couldn't have access to Prince like before. Like I said before, Prince was from a wealthy family. When Prince was leaving Nigeria to study abroad, he got Ugomma a cell phone so they could communicate with each other. But when Mr. Bernard got to know about it, he collected the cell phone, removed Ugomma's SIM card, and threw it away. So there was no way Ugomma could communicate with Prince, and her suffering continued. Some bad thoughts began to come to Ugomma's mind. This time around, Ugomma's decided to join some bad group of friends. Since everyone is not listening to me, I will do my own thing in my own way. This is what Ugomma said to herself. So she ran out of the house and went to a different state. In that place, Ugomma joined some bad friends, and there she began to live her life the way she wanted. She was living with her new friends, and they were doing what they liked and wanted, dating different guys. So Ugomma got pregnant. When she discovered she was pregnant, she said to herself that she was going to keep this child. She's not going to get rid of it. I have had a lot of it already, so I will be keeping this child. Ugomma said. So when Ugomma gave birth to her child, when the child was about 3 years old, Ugomma went out to get something from the market. There was this big hotel close to where Ugomma was passing. And there she finally found this missing one. She saw the love of her life, Prince. Prince was right there at the hotel with his friends, and that is how the Ugomma story changed for the better. Currently, Ugomma is married to Prince, and they have 3 kids of their own.